Hey, this is Adam from Connecticut.
Hey, Adam, what's going on?
What's going on, man? I wanted to discuss briefly the Turkish War in Africa,
Okay.
and as a Turkish American myself, there's been what I feel like a lot of misinformation that has been peddled in the media about
Well,
it.
okay, tell me.
Well, this all this talk, for example, about there's a genocide over there, and all
Who said
evidence
that there was a
shows that.
genocide over there?
Well, there's a lot of folks on Twitter saying that what we're doing in Afrin, it's a genocide, it's a crime against
Well,
humanity. We're
well,
trying
let
to
me out of the gate.
replace Kurds for Arabs.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
let me just say out of the gate, I'm someone who definitely says that what Turkey is doing in Afrin definitely involves, as far as I can tell, and it's a very fast-moving situation, but absolutely war crimes, and there absolutely are proxy forces that Turkey's using that has an example promised to rape, Kurdish women, and there was serious aerial or shelling of Afrin, which definitely harmed civilians, and this definitely is a move of Turkish aggression against actually a very, in some ways, very progressive and very interesting political experiment. There's no doubt about that. But I've never used the word genocide. I don't know anybody with
No,
any kind of
and
platform that has. So
I'm not saying it was you or anybody, on the majority report. That's
Yeah, no, I'm
saying
just.
that.
I guess what I'm
It's
just saying is
a
that.
lot of the stuff I've been reading,
Yeah.
they're calling it a genocide when
But
there
where?
really isn't a
But
genocide
where?
going on.
But where?
And
Where though?
wait,
I guess.
what was that?
Well, I'm not trying to be so rude, but I guess the problem is that when people call in on anything, if it's just random, like if it's just Twitter people, I can't, I read up on this stuff. I've actually even published on it recently, and I have not seen anybody use that word who has any type of platform. So, I'm not going to respond to what people say on Twitter, basically on anything. So, you know what I mean? So I just get caught at that word because that's a major word. And I'm a fierce critic of Turkish policy, but I wouldn't use that word. So,
Yeah. And you talked about the civilian casualties, and I think according to most independent estimates, it's been anywhere between 200 or 300 civilians that were killed over there.
I don't know about that.
And look, obviously, all those 300 or so folks, they had families, they had, loved ones and so on, and that's all tragic. But a lot of people are comparing the war in Afrin to what, for example, Assad is doing in eastern Ghouta, which is outside of Damascus, where in the same period of time, him and the Russians killed over 1,300 people. And the fact of the matter is, there simply is no comparison.
Well, let me just say this. I think I've been pretty clear, at least for me, that in fact the only political faction that I have any solidarity with and support for is the Kurdish faction that is fighting in Afrin and elsewhere, or was in Afrin. Right? I do. I support their political experiment. I support Kurdish autonomy. I also think that they have, in fact, that they have been incredibly effective in fighting ISIS, and at times the Turkish state has been on the other side of that. So let's be real as well. At the same time,
I completely disagree. We have not been on the side of ISIS at no point in time.
There has not been, even in the most conservative scenario. There's much more explosive accusations, including from guys like Biden. But you're saying that the Turkish state did not, particularly in 2014, when they were, firmly entrenched in getting rid of Assad. And I just want to say briefly, I don't for a second ever deny Assad's atrocities or Russia or Iran or any of the proxies there. So I agree with you on that. But that being said, you're really going to deny that Turkey did not, at the very least, allow not only ISIS but other fighters from far-right jihadi Sunni groups who have committed incredible crimes in Syria against everybody and have been backed by the Gulf and backed by us to some extent. You're saying, and certainly backed by the Turks, that they didn't allow easy cross-border movements with those organizations, that they didn't let those organizations funnel money and coordinate logistics out of Turkish territory. Now in 2018, and with some terrorist attacks in Turkey, I think the policy has adjusted. But the notion that Turkey wasn't at the very least lenient and lax with those groups, that's just not real. That's not what happened.
Well, can I just address that? So in 2014, 2015, as you well know, Turkey and the Turkish border with Syria was swamped with refugees. I mean, we have something like 3.5 million Syrians living as refugees in Turkey. So just imagine that swamp of humanity, and I don't want to use like that word, but just imagine that sea of humanity coming right at your border, pretty much at the same time. And this talking point that I'm hearing, like, oh, we should have done more to stop foreign fighters from going
it's not that they
Syria,
should have done more. It's that they were coordinating
when our
separate
authorities were swamped by,
but separate. But these are it's I understand that, but it's not the same thing. There was absolutely when Turkey coordinated with the Gulf and they chose what groups to fund and give weapons to, it was hard right groups like Jabhat al-Nusra, and there absolutely were logistics and funding and weapons and resources and oil sales that went to IS. That's distinct from the refugee crisis. And number two, I got to tell you now, I'm sorry if you connect the fact that this, in my view, is absolutely part and parcel of a new repression of Kurds inside Turkey by Erdogan, including arresting democratic Kurdish leaders who ran on social democratic ticket and were not involved in any type of violent activity for self-determination and expanded rights, by the way, for everybody in Turkey, which is what the HDP does. You coordinate that with this punishment of Turkish forces, with this punishment, let me finish, this punishment of Kurds by this Turkish state that's happening in Afrin now. And you combine that with the fact that, well, hey, man, I don't know. Turkey just took the most effective fighting force against ISIS off the board, at least in Afrin. They certainly did. So at the very least, even today, Turkey has, look, I'm absolutely referring to them. Of course.
Yeah, that is a terrorist organization.
Not now, in terms of
I
what?
Understand
in terms
most
of
people
they're
in
not
the West
same. They're not the same.
Don't give two fucks about terrorist attacks in Turkey, but
they're not YPG. What YPG is
over there?
YPG.
We're the ones that have to deal with this.
YPG.
And this notion that the weapons that the United States is supplying this organization isn't somehow going to filter back into Turkey and kill Turkish citizens, both Greeks, Armenians, Kurds, and Turks.
That hasn't happened. That hasn't. Everything that I'm talking about
has happened.
What terrorist attacks have YPG engaged in Turkey?
No, I'm not referring to the terrorists. I'm talking about the weapons. The weapons that the U.S. military
the YPG
has ended up in Turkey.
So let's look at the bigger process here, okay? And I'm not saying I understand that the Kurdish Workers' Party has engaged in terrorism. I get that, okay? I know PKK has engaged in terrorism and hurt civilians in Turkey, and that's wrong, and nobody supports that. And I do care about that, of course. But let's look at the bigger picture here. You had a process under Erdogan, where there actually was some improvement in Kurdish rights. He was negotiating with the leader of the PKK. All of that stopped. All of that stopped several years ago. Partially, no question, because of electoral reasons. When the HDP, which again is a social democratic party, they have leaders who have been put in prison to this day. They outperformed and undermined Erdogan's attempt to consolidate parliament to increase his autocratic rule and powers in his hands in a referendum to expand his power. That was in 2016. Those people have been put in jail
Yeah,
on
the
trumped
year
up
of the
fake,
coup,
on trumped up
when
false charges. Meanwhile, the peace process has stopped, repression has increased, and now the YPG, which in Syria has done nothing but beat ISIS and implement really important political experiments. And of course, they're going to get support from the U.S. because they are actually an effective fighting force against IS, and compared to all the other
they were an
and
effective
compared,
fighting force, but it's also a very stupid and short-term strategy.
yeah, we're just not going to see eye to eye on this. But you can call back
Yeah.
in again. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.